I never thought I'd be standing on the precipice of something new at this stage of my life, something that made my heart race in ways I hadn't felt in years. I was 39 years old, in the middle of being young and old. Between who I used to be and who I was evolving into, I felt trapped. My world used to feel lively and full of life, and I had been married to him for nearly 20 years. However, that brightness diminished with time. Passion became a duty, and love became a routine. My husband, who used to be full of energy and excitement, now seemed to be happy with quiet spending evenings apart and accepting life's predictable course. I still yearned for more. Myself. I still desired to be felt, heard, and seen. I don't know when my son Jack started to notice how I had changed. Perhaps he had always. He was now 18, mature, self-assured, and perceptive in a way that occasionally unnerved me. Although we had always been close, it felt different to have him around lately, as if he were taking care of me instead of the other way around. "Are you happy, Mom?" One evening, while we were standing in the kitchen, a straightforward question was posed. There was silence in the house. The ticking of the clock reverberated between us, and my husband had gone to bed early. As I stirred my tea, I chuckled quietly. "Why would you ask that?" "Of course, my love." Jack folded his arms and leaned against the counter. I looked into his eyes, surprised by the intensity of his eyes. "Because you don't seem like it." When had he grown so wise, so experienced? The young boy who clung to my side had changed. The fact that he was now a young man struck me more strongly than I had anticipated. I let out a sigh as I looked down at my mug-holding hands. I acknowledge that life simply changes sometimes. Even though people change, you shouldn't give up on life. His voice was full of concern as he spoke quietly. "Mom, you used to be so energetic. What took place?" I wanted to share everything with him, the isolation, the silent pain of being invisible, the desire for something special. However, some burdens weren't his to bear because he was my son. I grinned as a result. "Really, Jack, I'm all right." He appeared unconvinced. In the weeks that followed, I became increasingly aware of Jack's constant presence, his checking in, his attempts to engage me in conversation, and his ability to make me laugh. His protective nature had changed over the years. He was no longer just my son. I was starting to rely on him. We had not gone for a walk in years until one evening. The city lights were twinkling in the distance, and the air was cool. I felt free for the first time in a long time. As we walked side by side, I said, "Tell me something. What do you personally envision for the future?" Jack remained silent for a while before responding. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm certain that I want to live a regret-free life." I gave a longing smile. "That is a commendable objective." "How about you?" he inquired. I stopped moving. It was a surprise question. I had been a wife, mother, and caregiver for a very long time. My aspirations and desires had been suppressed and buried beneath obligations. However, as I stood there beneath the crisp night sky, I came to a realization. I did not wish to disappear. Being merely a shadow of my former self was not what I wanted. I desired to experience life once more. "I think I want to start living for myself again," I said slowly. Jack grinned. "Excellent." Suddenly something changed. For the first time in years, I was eager to see where this new path would lead me, even though I had no idea. A gentle tune lingered in the air as we strolled through the silent streets, encircling us like a whisper from the past. A few couples swayed to the soft beat of an old jazz song as the warm glow of a tiny cafe spilled onto the sidewalk. The scene was captivating. Two people moving in time, their worries forgotten as they are engrossed in the music. I stopped, mesmerized by the scene, even if only for a second. I hadn't done anything like that in such a long time since I'd let myself be present without hesitation or anticipation of what might happen next. Jack then took hold of my hand before I could respond. He said, "Dance with me." I shook my head and laughed. "What are you, Jack?" However, he was already dragging me in the direction of the cafe's open patio's gentle light. There was no time to say no, no questions. His hand was steady and warm in mine as we walked, and then he placed his other hand lightly on my waist as we danced. I was surprised by the confidence with which he led me. I laughed, half protesting, half. "You don't even dance, Jack." "Neither do you, so we're even." He smiled, a genuine, unadulterated laugh that had been absent from my life for too long erupted from somewhere deep within me. The cafe music encircled us, directing our steps, and we managed to dance as though we had been doing it for ages. There was only the rhythm of the song, the soft twinkling of string lights above us, and the sensation of being alive. No awkwardness, no hesitation. I spun perhaps not elegantly, but it made no difference. My cheeks warm from the sudden excitement. "Oh, hush!" I shot back. Then his face softened as abruptly as before. He whispered, his voice barely audible over the music. "You should do this more." "Do what?" I asked, a little breathless. "Live," he said, and the words weighed more heavily than I had anticipated, because in reality I had forgotten how to live, how to savor moments for their own sake, guilt-free and without concern for the future. I had been a wife, mother, and caregiver for so long that I had somehow lost my identity. But I felt free tonight, something I hadn't felt in years, dancing to music neither of us really knew. Under the cafe lights, Jack grinned as though he could see the insight seeping into my being. Before the song ended, he twirled me one last time and said, "You're beautiful when you're happy." I let out a breath as the excitement of the moment cooled down inside of me. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps it was time to get back to living. Something had changed in me as we walked out of the cafe and down the street. For the first time in a long time, I was eager to find out what would happen next, even though I had no idea. The house was silent when we got there, illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. As usual, my husband was already asleep. Same silence, same routine. However, something was different tonight. I had no desire to go to sleep. I felt awake for the first time in years, really, really awake. The memory of dancing in the cafe lights, laughing unrestrainedly, and feeling like myself again, still made my skin hum. Jack took note. He did. "Are you not exhausted?" he asked, leaning against the doorway and grinning knowingly at me. After a moment of hesitation, I shook my head. "I don't believe I am." He smiled and said, "Good, then let's do something." I arched an eyebrow. "Such as?" He gave a shrug. "When was the last time you did something spontaneous just for fun?" I was paralyzed by the question because I honestly couldn't recall. I had devoted so many years to ensuring the happiness of others, my son, my spouse, and my family, that I had forgotten to ask myself that same question. At some point, Jack took hold of my jacket. "Let's go, please," I scowled. "Where are we going?" "You'll see," he said, his mischievous eyes sparkling. I paused for a second. The house was silent. My husband was asleep, and I should probably just go to bed as usual. However, I then reflected on my feelings from tonight. How free, how light, and something inside of me wouldn't let that feeling go. So, I picked up my coat and went out the door after him. We were outside a dance studio 20 minutes later. Puzzled, I turned to Jack. "At this hour? A dance studio?" He smiled and used a key to unlock the door. "I may have persuaded a friend to let us use it for a while." I shook my head, not believing it. "And just how did you manage that?" He gave a shrug. "I do things my way." He pushed the door open and turned on the lights before I could object. The polished wooden floor was shining in the gentle light, and the studio was deserted. One wall was lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors that reflected us back in silent expectation. The room had a sacred quality to it, as if it were awaiting something to awaken within. Jack browsed through his phone before approaching a tiny speaker in the corner. A moment later, the room was filled with gentle music. I swallowed rhythmically and slowly. "Jack, I'm not sure if—" He turned to me and interrupted. "No excuses, just dance with me, Mom." I looked at my reflection as I let out a breath. The woman who was looking back at me appeared uncertain and hesitant. There was another thing underneath it, though, something that is just waiting to get out. "All right," I replied. "But it's your fault if I look foolish," he laughed. "Deal." And we started to move, just like at the cafe. I started out rigid, moving clumsily and deliberately, too restrained, as though I had concealed the aspect of myself that used to enjoy times like this for too long. Jack, however, was patient. He led me, gently moving with ease and confidence. He whispered, "Just feel, don't think." I closed my eyes as a result, and I let go for the first time in years. I gave in to the music, allow my body to recall what it felt like to move fearlessly and without hesitation, and something broke open inside of me as I danced. A rush of feelings, recollections, and a desire for something I wasn't even aware I was lacking. I had been slipping into the background of my own life for so long, but I was here, tonight, breathless and absolutely, totally unrestrained. I was laughing by the time the music ended, giddy, awake, elated. Jack smiled. "You see, told you that you were capable of it." Still catching my breath, I shook my head. "I'm amazed that I forgot how much I adore this." "Well," he said, "perhaps you should do more of it." I paused, and his face grew softer. "Attend a class. Spend more time outside. Do something for yourself only." Something stirred in my chest as I gazed at him. Could I? Was it really possible for me to leave the life I had created, the comfortable, secure, and predictable life, and pursue something exclusively for myself? Before I had a chance to question it, the response arrived. "Yes," I replied with a smile. "The choice has already been made. I believe I will." Suddenly something changed inside of me. I was more than just his wife. I was more than just his mom. I was me, and that was sufficient for the first time in a long time. I felt lighter than I had in years when I woke up the following morning. The unexpected night of dancing left my body aching a little, but I felt alive rather than exhausted. The excitement from last night was still pulsing through my veins as I stretched. The movement of my body, the way I had given myself permission to relax, it was euphoric. When Jack entered the kitchen with a smile on his face, I was still experiencing that emotion. He reached for the coffee pot, teasingly saying, "You're still glowing." Even though I rolled my eyes, I couldn't resist grinning. "Last night was enjoyable," he said. "So, ready for the next step?" I arched an eyebrow. "Next step?" He sipped his coffee while leaning against the counter. "Why stop now? If you want to take this feeling seriously, you should learn something new, something thrilling." Intrigued, I cocked my head. "Such as?" He smiled and set down his mug. "Bachata." I blinked. "Bachata?" "Yeah," he said, taking out his phone and starting to play music. The kitchen was filled with the slow, rhythmic melody. It was smooth, sensual, and completely different from anything I had ever danced to. He clarified that it is more than just a dance. It's about feeling the music connecting, expressing oneself, and allowing it to tell a tale. He swayed a little to the beat while I bit my lip and listened to the song. I was stirred by the way he explained it. A curious thing, a problem I wanted to dance like that. but I had never done it before. I sipped my coffee slowly while feigning indifference. "Okay, instruct me." Jack smiled. "This is going to be fantastic." We pushed the furniture out of the way and made room in the living room that evening. My chest began to flutter with a nervous excitement as soon as the music began. "All right," Jack said, moving ahead of me. "Bachata is all about fluidity, connection with your partner." "It's not just about the moves, it's about emotion." I took a deep breath and nodded. "Show me." He took my hands in his, then placed one of mine on his shoulder, his other hand finding my waist. The basic is a side-to-side motion. 1, 2, 3, then a tap on 4. Initially hesitant, I followed his example. The beat was addictive, rich with a deeper quality, but slower than salsa. It was almost personal. With his hand lightly guiding my waist, he whispered, "Good. Now, let your hips sway with it. It's all in the hips and body rolls." With every step, he rolled his hips slightly, and my cheeks began to flush. "Relax, Mom," he chuckled, sensing my stiffness. "Don't overthink it. Feel the music." "I am relaxed," I insisted, though my body was a liar. His knowing smirk told me he didn't believe it for a second. He demonstrated again, his movements fluid and effortless. I shook off my nerves and let out a breath. I let the beat seep into my bones by closing my eyes for a while. Upon opening them once more, I moved more fluidly, mimicking his movements and allowing my body to follow his. "Better," he whispered. Everything else vanished as the music swirled around us and filled the tiny gap between us. There was more to it than just dancing, a silent pledge of trust, a dialogue devoid of words. Additionally, I had been raising my son Marcus alone for years. Our bond was unbreakable because it was based on years of unwavering support, laughter, and trust. Horses had always been Marcus's passion, and I knew just what to do. When he turned 21, I contacted former acquaintances who ran a reputable equestrian school and signed him up for a course where he could improve his abilities. I was proud to see him embrace the lessons with the same fervor he showed for everything he loved. I made the decision to focus on my own life while Marcus adapted to his new life in equestrian training. I hadn't been in a committed relationship for a very long time. I felt that it might be time to let someone into my world, even though I didn't feel the need for romance right away. Lucas came into play at that point. Lucas was a man who effortlessly emanated charm. He was charismatic, he was successful, handsome, and always had the perfect thing to say. However, I never really connected with him. For some reason, he appeared to be a secure option, someone I could confidently present to my friends. Even though he didn't arouse any strong feelings in me, he was the perfect partner. However, I persuaded myself that friendship was more significant than passion. I noticed a change in Marcus after a few months of dating Lucas. He had grown more aloof. Our casual, easy conversations felt tense now. I frequently saw him observing me with an unreadable expression. I initially believed that he was just getting used to his new routine, but it seemed like our tension was increasing. One afternoon, Marcus came into the kitchen while I was making tea. "You're home early," I said. Marcus shrugged, his eyes darting to me and then back to the water glass he was holding. "Yeah, just had some things on my mind." With a heavy silence between us, I poured myself a drink. "Do you want to discuss it?" I inquired. He paused for a second. Then he put down the glass and sighed. "Do you like him?" It was a surprise question. I frowned slightly. "Lucas? Why do you ask?" He crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. "Mom, I simply don't see it." Around him, you don't glow. When we discuss topics you genuinely care about, you laugh more than you do now. I shook my head and laughed quietly. Relationships aren't always about thrills, Marcus. Sometimes all you need to do is find someone with whom you can share your life. He clenched his jaw. That sounds more like settling, Mom. I paused at the intensity of his voice. Marcus, I said carefully, all I want is for you to be content. He then left, leaving me with a strange feeling. As I lay in bed that night, my mind drifted back to Marcus's early years, how he had always been my biggest source of happiness. I reflected on the way he had gazed at me this evening. I was aware that something had changed. His normally effortless laughter felt strained, and his gazes lingered too long. I observed that he seemed to be afraid of stepping over an invisible boundary. Lucas came over for dinner one evening. He came in with wine and gave me a cheek kiss. Marcus came into the kitchen, his hair still damp from his shower. When he saw Lucas, his lips pressed into a thin line. You're just in time to eat, I remarked. I already had something, he answered, his voice tight, gaze fixed on Lucas. Lucas laughed. Sit with us for a while, kid. Marcus's mouth clenched. I am not a child. Lucas raised an eyebrow. All right, no offense intended. I let out a breath. Just stay for a minute, Marcus. He slowly took a seat. He hardly spoke, hardly touched his food. I noticed him staring at me with an unreadable expression. It wasn't until Lucas had left later that evening that I found Marcus sitting by himself in the living room. I sat down with him. What's the matter with you? I inquired gently. After a long silence, he turned to look at me. You're not in love with him, Mom. My heart skipped a beat. Marcus. He cut me off. You don't. You believe that you should be with him because it's the proper thing to do. I took a deep breath. The truth weighed heavily. Lucas wasn't loved by me. He was practical. He helped me fill the voids. You're right, I finally whispered. I'm not in love with Lucas. Marcus nodded. Then why, Mom? I suppose I was lonely, and he's safe. Safe isn't living, he said gently but firm. You deserve more. You taught me to go for what I'm passionate about, with the horses. His words, like Jack's, resonated. What was happening? New continuation starts here. Approx for 2440 words needed. A couple of weeks after that conversation, with Marcus's words still echoing in my mind, safe isn't living, Mom. I knew I couldn't continue the charade with Lucas. The thought of it felt like wearing a suit of armor that was 2 sizes too small, constricting my breath, my very being. It was time for honesty, however uncomfortable. So what do you do when you realize you're living a life that doesn't quite fit? Do you keep trying to squeeze into it, or do you find the courage to seek a new tailor? Let me know your approach in the comments, and if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. I called Lucas and asked to meet for coffee. The cafe was neutral territory, a place with no shared memories to cloud the difficult conversation ahead. He arrived, his usual charming self, a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Hey, he said, leaning in for a hug. I sidestepped with an awkward pat on his arm. His smile faltered slightly. Everything okay? Lucas, we need to talk, I said, the classic, dreaded opener. I explained as kindly as I could that I couldn't continue seeing him. I told him he was a good man, that the fault wasn't his but mine. I spoke of my need to figure myself out, to understand what I truly wanted from life, a journey I had to take alone. Each word felt like a small stone dropped into a deep well, the ripples spreading outwards. He listened, his expression shifting from confusion to a guarded hurt. So that's it? He asked when I finished, his voice flat. You're just ending it? I am, I confirmed, hating the pain I was causing, but knowing it was a necessary pain, a step towards a truth I could no longer ignore. I'm sorry, Lucas. Truly. The conversation was brief after that, strained and uncomfortable. He paid for the coffees, a final, polite gesture. As I watched him walk out of the cafe, a part of me felt a pang of guilt, but a larger part felt a surprising lightness, the release of a burden I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. One difficult conversation down, one monumental one to go. The talk with David, my husband of 2 decades, was a prospect that filled me with a far greater sense of dread. This wasn't a fledgling relationship. This was a life, interwoven and complex. I chose a quiet Saturday morning, Jack conveniently out with friends. David was in his usual weekend spot, engrossed in the newspaper. "David," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Can we talk? Really talk?" He lowered the paper. His eyes, when they finally met mine, held a weary understanding. "I suppose this is about us, isn't it?" "It is," I said, taking a deep breath. "It's about how we've become distant, how this house feels more like a shared living space than a home filled with connection." He didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I felt it too, the drift." We talked for hours that morning, more honestly than we had in years. We spoke of the unspoken resentments, the diverging paths our interests had taken, the slow erosion of intimacy. It was painful, raw, but also strangely cleansing. There were no easy answers, no magical solutions. The word divorce hung in the air, unspoken for a long time, then finally voiced with a quiet solemnity. Was that our future? Or was there a flicker of something, anything, worth trying to salvage, to rebuild not as it was, but as something new? "I don't want to just exist anymore, David," I told him, tears welling. "I want to live, and I want you to live too, truly live, whether that's with me or not." He reached across the space between our armchairs and tentatively took my hand. "Maybe," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I hadn't heard in years. "Maybe we both forgot how." We didn't decide anything definitive that day, except to keep talking, to explore the terrifying and perhaps liberating possibility of professional counseling. It was a small step, but it felt like a significant one, a crack of light in a very dark room. The following weeks were a period of tentative exploration. True to my word to Jack, I found a beginner's bachata class. Walking into that studio alone for the first time, I was a bundle of nerves. The music pulsed, a rhythm so different from the life I knew. Women in vibrant attire moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible, their hips swaying, their laughter echoing. I felt like an imposter, a suburban mom completely out of her depth. But the instructor, a fiery woman named Isabella, had a way of making everyone feel welcome, her energy infectious. "The music will tell you what to do," she'd shout over the melody. "Just listen with your body, not your head." Slowly, awkwardly, I began to move. My steps were hesitant, my rhythm off. But with each class, a tiny bit of the stiffness in my soul seemed to melt away. There was a joy in the movement, a connection to the music, and sometimes a surprising connection with a dance partner during the brief rotating pairings. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Meanwhile, Jack, my sweet, perceptive son, continued to be my rock. He'd ask about my classes, a knowing smile on his face. "So, Mom, mastering the sensual hip roll yet?" he'd tease. "Hardly," I'd laugh. I look more like a confused flamingo. But his light-hearted encouragement meant the world. Marcus, too, called more often from his equestrian school. Our conversations felt lighter, the previous tension eased by the honesty about Lucas. He was thriving, his voice filled with a passion for his horses that was inspiring. "You know, Mom," he said one day, "seeing you try something new, something for yourself, it's pretty great. His words, Jack's unwavering support, these were the lifelines that kept me going as I navigated the uncertain waters with David. We started counseling with Dr. Ramirez. The sessions were difficult, unearthing years of buried emotions and miscommunications. There were tears, moments of anger, but also, surprisingly, moments of understanding, of shared sorrow for what we had let our marriage become. It was like an archaeological dig, sifting through layers of sediment to see if any treasure remained beneath. This journey of self-discovery is rarely a straight line, is it? It's more like a dance itself, with forward steps, backward slides, and plenty of fumbles. What's a time you stepped out of your comfort zone and surprised yourself? I'd love for you to share your experience in the comments. It's always so inspiring to hear from you all. Months passed. The rhythm of my life began to change. The dance classes became a regular fixture, a source of joy, and a surprising amount of confidence. I made a few friends there, other women on their own journeys of rediscovery. The conversations with David, both in and out of therapy, continued. They weren't always easy, but they were real. We started doing small things together again. A walk in the park, a movie, even attempting to cook a new recipe together, which usually ended in laughter and takeout. The silences in the house were no longer quite so heavy. Sometimes they were even companionable. One evening, after a particularly challenging but rewarding therapy session, David turned to me as we were driving home. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "I miss who we used to be, but I'm also curious about who we might become." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "Me too, David," I whispered. "Me too." It wasn't a declaration of renewed love, not yet, but it was a statement of hope, of possibility. The chasm between us still existed, but it didn't seem quite so impossibly wide anymore. We were perhaps beginning to build a bridge, one tentative plank at a time. My focus had shifted from what was lost to what could be gained, not just in my marriage, but within myself. The desire to be seen, heard, and felt was slowly being fulfilled, not by an external source, but from within. I was learning to see myself, hear my own needs, and feel my own strength. The emptiness that had ached for so long was gradually being filled, not with the distraction of a new romance, but with the quiet satisfaction of self-acceptance and the courage to embrace change. The dance continued, both literally and figuratively. I was still learning the steps, still sometimes stumbling, but I was no longer afraid to move to the music of my own life, even if the rhythm was one I was creating as I went along. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. In many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was looking forward to the next measure, the next step, the next beat of my own reawakened heart. The woman standing on the precipice was no longer trapped. She was learning to soar. And that, for now, is where our story pauses. A journey of rediscovery is ongoing, a dance that never truly ends. What do you believe is the most crucial ingredient for finding happiness and fulfillment, especially when life throws you a curveball? Your insights are always so valuable, so please share them in the comments. Thanks for walking this path with me today. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you join us for the next chapter. Until then, remember to listen to your own music and never be afraid to dance.